Can everybody hear me okay? Everybody's muted that I see.
Joseph, yes.
I heard you, but I got some feedback.
We have to wait, Josh. I can't play it through my
Yeah, I'm getting echo feedback. Okay. Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukie Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the city website at www.milwaukieoregon.gov. You may locate them by navigating to the community calendar where tonight's meeting page is posted. If you have not yet reviewed the agenda, please do so. It contains important information about the process. Speaking of, do we need to have an election for Chair Pro Tem for tonight's meeting?
I don't know that we do, Commissioner Edge, Chair Edge. Justin isn't here at the moment.
I believe the last time that we did this, we had a nomination and a quick vote from the commissioners present.
Would one of y'all like to make a motion to have Chair Edge, or to have Commissioner Edge chair the meeting?
I'll make a motion that we nominate Chair or Edge to chair the meeting.
And I will second.
Well, thank you for the motion and the second. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. I will proceed chairing the meeting. Thank you. So the next order of business is the Native Lands Acknowledgement. The City of Milwaukie respectfully acknowledges that our community is located on the ancestral homeland of the Clackamas people. In 1855, the surviving members of the Clackamas signed the Willamette Valley Treaty, also known as the Kalapuya-Petra Treaty, with the federal government in good faith. We offer our respect and gratitude to the indigenous people of this land. I'd just like to take a moment of silence to recognize the Indigenous people of this land. Thank you. Moving on to the approval of the June 11th meeting minutes. Does anyone have any corrections to make? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the notes as presented, or as presented.
Motion to approve the minutes as presented. Second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor, raise your hand and say aye. Aye, passes unanimously. Thank you all. Are there any informational items from staff?
Why, yes, indeed. We have big information tonight. We have a new planning commissioner with us, Lisa Graytrek. This is her first meeting, so welcome so much to the Planning Commission. We're so happy to have you here, and thank you so much for volunteering to be on the Planning Commission. It's a lot of work for a volunteer, so we really do appreciate you taking the time in the community. It's a very valuable thing that you're doing for the city of Milwaukee, so thank you. If you would like, do you want to tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Thank you very much, Laura. I appreciate that warm welcome. So my name is Lisa Graytrick. I am an architectural historian by trade. I work for an engineering firm stationed in downtown Portland, but I live in the Milwaukie area. I am approximately 1 block outside of city limits currently, over in the Linwood neighborhood. But I grew up pretty much my entire life in the Milwaukie vicinity, and was in the last graduating class of Milwaukie Middle School, and this is where my heart is, so I'm very happy to be able to volunteer for this position. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here.
Wow, a fellow Milwaukie Middle School student. That doesn't happen too often. I was actually there when it was Milwaukie Junior High School, but yeah, same school, so that's really cool. Welcome to the commission. It's great to have you join us.
Thank you.
Now this is an opportunity for the public to comment on items not on tonight's agenda. Do we have any members of the audience in attendance or virtually or in person?
I have, we've got some members of the audience here that I think are here for the Wes hearing. And then we've got one person online, Gail Shalom. If you wanted to participate at this moment, if you could raise your hand and I can promote you.
She's with the applicant team.
Oh, with the applicant team. Well, there you go. Thanks, Brett. Okay, thanks. Nope, nobody here. Chair Edge.
Okay. This would be an opportunity for the public to comment on anything that is not on our agenda tonight, but we'll move on. So thank you, Laura. Now, at this point of the agenda, the commission will act as the Community Involvement Advisory Committee. Although I'd like to hold any discussion or updates until the work session item where the commission is, that's not happening tonight. Is that really?
No, that is not happening tonight. Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
Okay. Let's see, with no one in the audience, I'll presume that no one wishes to speak with us as the CIAC. So are there any other updates from members of the CIAC, from the planning commissioners serving as the CIAC? Okay, then I guess we will move on to our hearing item.
And Commissioner Edge, if I could just insert for just a second, I know we keep kicking around this idea of having this conversation about the CIAC, but we're also now talking about having this Planning Commission orientation meeting. So we're in the progress of trying to schedule that. Right now, we're looking at September 10th. I think everybody was available at that time. Commissioner Mulhern, I think you were available that night, or is that? Okay, great. So that way, we're going to just hold that conversation and we can talk about the role of the CIAC during that Planning Commission or orientation meeting.
Perfect. Thank you, Laura. Okay, moving on to the hearing item. The next agenda item is a type 3 application for downtown design review with 3 accompanying type 1 reviews for community service use, Willamette Greenway, and natural resource. The type 3 hearing for downtown design review and the accompanying application called to order. The next agenda item is a public hearing to consider application primary file number DR-2024-002. The purpose of this application is to allow construction of a small addition to the existing administration building at the Kellogg Creek Water Source Recovery Facility. The applicant has the burden of proving that the application is consistent with the city's zoning ordinance, comprehensive plan, and any applicable municipal code provisions, and the proposal conforms with the applicable criteria. I now ask staff to cite the municipal code section or sections where the criteria can be found.
Thank you, Chair Edge. I'm tempted to cite the sections that are not applicable from the municipal code. It's a long list. I'm kidding, it is a long list. So bear with me. From Milwaukie Municipal Code, Chapter 12.16, Access Management, Title 18, Flood Hazard Regulations, Section 19.304, Downtown Zones, including the Downtown Mixed Use Zone, Section 19.401, Willamette Greenway Zone, Section 19.402, Natural Resources, Section 19.508, Downtown Site and Building Design Standards, Chapter 19.600, Off-Street Parking and Loading, Chapter 19.700, Public Facility Improvements, Section 19.804, Alteration of Non-Conforming Uses and Development, Section 19.904, Community Service Uses, Section 19.905, Conditional Uses, Section 19.907, Downtown Design Review, and Section 19.1006, Type 3 Review.
Thank you, Brett. All testimony and evidence must be directed towards the applicable substantive criteria. Failure to address a criterion or raise an issue with sufficient detail to allow the Planning Commission an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue precludes appeal to the City Council based on that issue. Failure to raise constitutional or other issues related to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient detail to allow a response precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party with standing may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission to the City Council. Persons with standing are those who submit comments or testify. If additional documents or evidence are provided by any party, the Commission may, if requested, allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow the parties a reasonable opportunity to respond. Any such continuance or extension shall be subject to the limitations of the 120-day rule unless the continuance or extension is requested or agreed to by the applicant. We don't really see a need to impose any restrictions on any testimony since there's no one really here to testify other than the applicant. So yeah, getting into conflicts of interest. Does any member of the commission wish to abstain from this hearing?
No.
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 No. Thank you. Does any member of the commission wish to declare an actual or potential conflict of interest?
No.
No. No.
No, thank you. Does any member of the commission wish to report on any ex parte contacts?
No.
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 No, thank you. Will any commissioner who is, I guess it would, yeah, it wouldn't be applicable. Does any commissioner who has visited the site prior to this hearing please raise their hand? Did any commissioners who visited the site speak to anyone at the site or note anything different from what is indicated in the staff report for this application?
No. No.
No.
No, thank you. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the participation of any member of the Planning Commission? No, thank you. Let's proceed to the staff report. Oh, sorry, last question. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? Okay, very good. Thank you. Now let's proceed to the staff report.
Okay, thank you. Bear with me just a moment while I share things here and slide them over. All right. Well, good evening, Chair Edge, Commissioners. members of the public. I'm Brett Kelver, a senior planner with the city of Milwaukee, and I'll be walking you through the presentation tonight. Let me see if I can I minimize this? Okay. So this application package focused on the proposal to build a small addition to the administrative building at the West facility here in Milwaukee. And let me try to advance the slide here. There we go. All right. So just kind of a bird's eye view and recap of the site situation. This is the wastewater treatment plant facility that's located here in downtown Milwaukee on the riverfront. It's you know, a large campus, just under 11 acres, and includes both the operational facility itself, and you'll note kind of on the aerial diagram here, kind of a surrounding park area. There's a paved pedestrian bicycle path that connects the southern end of Milwaukee Bay Park to the Island Station neighborhood, which is just adjacent to the south. The facility's been there for, where are we, 50 years now, established in 1974. It was established before the city had a community service use designation, so it's long been regarded as a de facto community service use, and over time, proposals to make adjustments to the facility have required some level or another of community service use review.
Hey, Brett, just quick point. You're sharing the presenter's view, so we're seeing the next slide and the speaker notes and the controls. So I don't know if you can toggle this on the display settings menu at the top.
Let me try that.
Yeah, swap.
Well.
Perfect.
So now you're seeing what you want to see, but I'm not. Interesting. Why? Hold on, let me.
We're seeing the opposite of you.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Share edge.
Well, I can deal with the presenter view, but everyone else on YouTube would be seeing that as well.
Yeah, that's not what we want. Okay. Oh, there I am. I'm still up there. I do want to share my screen. How about now? Are you still, Joseph, are you still seeing the next slide?
Yeah, I've got the kind of the list of slides over on the left, and it looks a little different than it did before, but it's not the presentation.
Yeah, that is not what we were seeing in the room. Yeah. So we're not exactly trying to fix it, because if it's not one thing, it's another in these meetings, trying to get it just right every time.
How about now?
No, I'm still seeing the same thing. I'm less worried about it for myself. I'm more worried about it for anyone else that watches on YouTube.
Well, I think in this instance, we'll just roll with it. I don't know how big our YouTube audience will be for this meeting.
That's fine.
I think we'll just go with it for now.
Yeah, we just need to be able to proceed. So perfect. Thank you. I'll work with it.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. I'll have to troubleshoot that. All right. So just a quick overview then of the proposed development. The smaller image to the left of whatever version of the slide you're seeing shows the administration building itself, and you can see there's a very small addition proposed on the west side of the building. There's currently a carport there, but the main project involves a 1,200 square foot addition on the east side of the building. This is closest to McLoughlin Boulevard and the trolley trail. The larger image here is a floor plan view of the proposed modified facility. And you can see, again, here on the right-hand side of the image is some of the new addition, including a conference room, a break room area. And the applicant team can explain a little bit more about the rationale for the changes and show an image of the existing floor plan. But part of the idea was to consolidate some of the existing amenities on the site into this one building, including some more equally sized locker rooms for men and women in the facility, and then the addition of the conference room and break room and reconfiguration of some of the spaces inside. So it is a relatively small project that is setting up the facility for some future changes. And just as we've noted, there are several application pieces here, and part of that is due to a couple of the overlays that are on the site. The image on the left is showing the Willamette Greenway overlay zone. You can see the entire site is covered by that, and so that section of code and the related conditional use rules come in play. So when modifications are made to Willamette Greenway areas, there's usually some kind of a conditional use involved. And the image on the right is showing one of the two natural resource designations on the site. Obviously, it's next to the river, and so what's a little bit less issue here is the more protected area, which is the water quality resource area, which extends about 50 feet from the top of bank. The project work itself is happening, quite a distance from that area, but there is a habitat conservation area, or HCA, that includes in the area where the addition will take place. And so normally when there is some disturbance of a water quality resource or a habitat conservation area, there is some kind of natural resource review here. In both these cases, the nature of the impacts to these two overlays are relatively minor, and we'll return to that point in a moment. But the key player here is the underlying zoning of the site. There is some history to this. It's currently zoned DMU for downtown mixed use. This is a bit of a holdover from the past. There's some subzones in the downtown area, and this site had been looked at by the city for a long time with some hope of maybe retiring the wastewater treatment plant and being able to redevelop the site. It's obviously a very attractive location there on the waterfront. Over time, there's been a lot of conversations and efforts to work with Wes on this, and over time there's been some acceptance that the facility is going to continue to be there for the foreseeable future. This is the first project like this, I think, that we've had in a while with the facility, especially since we've had the current downtown design standards, and so it has awakened an awareness that this zoning is problematic, and the trigger of the downtown design review process feels a little inappropriate for this site given its location. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But there are some exemptions from downtown design review for a very small addition, for example, 250 square feet or less. And if it wasn't visible from a street or public walkway, it wouldn't necessarily need downtown design review. Obviously, although it's not a huge addition, it is larger than that threshold. And so that is what has triggered the need for this review. So overall, I think the project itself is very straightforward, but the nature of the various overlays, and in this case in particular, the trigger for the downtown design review is what has brought us here to this level of hearing. So just recapping of the four application types that are involved, the downtown design review one is been designated as the primary file. It's the one that is requiring the type 3 review by the Planning Commission. The other three aspects of this project, the community service use, the Willamette Greenway conditional use, and the natural resource review, if not for the downtown design review piece, all of these are regarded as minor modifications or are complying with the clear and objective standards that are laid out. And so if it was just these 3 reviews by themselves, they would be handled administratively without the need for a hearing. But the reason they are all packaged together is because they have been submitted and are being reviewed concurrently, and our code does require that when their concurrent applications submitted, they get brought up to the highest level of review. That does not change the approval criteria for any of them. So there is actually the discretion in this decision is limited to the downtown design review piece. And so that's what I want to emphasize here. So looking back at the context for the design review piece, I wanted to share an image just kind of emphasizing the area of intent for the design review process. I've kind of the line that's highlighted in yellow is showing, a large section of Main Street that represents the downtown core area, and that's what really the area of focus is. Main Street and those side streets in the downtown core, what were intended to be the focus of the downtown design review process, where we're interested in maximizing the space, filling the blocks that are there, creating buildings, especially when there's redevelopment, that, do all these things that we'd like to do to make our Main Street and downtown core an active, engaging place with, pedestrian interest. And so we've had several other downtown design review projects in the last 5 years for some of the new buildings that we've had, the Axle Tree development, Henley Place, the Coho Point development, all of those were actually in the downtown core. I think a couple things to note with this, the yellow star kind of at the bottom left corner of the image is showing this project area, and you can see the degree of separation. It's quite a distance from the downtown core. It's separated by McLoughlin Boulevard or Highway 99E, and it has a lot more in common with Milwaukie Bay Park than it does the downtown core. We are also talking in this context about changes to existing development. This is not a proposal for a whole new facility there. It's just an adjustment or addition to the existing building. And that I think is a significant consideration. It's also fair to note that the whole facility was developed before we had the downtown design standards and guidelines that we have today. So that's where the staff's assessment and the conversations that we had with the applicant team concluded that it's just kind of an unfortunate procedural formality that we have to do the downtown design review. The downtown design standards don't really fit for the location, as was kind of indicated in the findings. That said, the applicant has made a valiant effort to address the downtown design guidelines, and the ones that are applicable have indicated how the project is doing the best it can given its location to address those. So that was reflected in the findings, and the applicant team may want to elaborate on some of their efforts to meet those standards. But that's what I wanted to say about this piece of it. So this image is just showing a rendering of the existing building and the primary addition, this is looking at the east side of the building where that new community room and the break room behind it will be. And I guess to highlight some of the things that the applicant team emphasized when they were addressing the downtown design guidelines, the use of the extensive windows and glazing, creates a really welcoming environment. There are articulation features in the building that meet those applicable guidelines. There is an element of weather protection. And in all, this is an enhancement of the existing building. It is working well with the existing design of the building and kind of adding to it using similar materials, presenting kind of a permanent, welcoming sense of facade there. So it does invite and present some openness to that southern end of Milwaukie Bay Park. So in summary, the staff assessment was that the design as proposed does meet the applicable design guidelines. So just to summarize, the staff recommendation was to approve the entire application package with the findings and the conditions of approval that were presented in there. And I'll just kind of leave you with the standard slate of options that you have for your discussion tonight, including approving the application as it was submitted with the findings and conditions. If through your discussion you decide that some modifications are needed to either the findings or conditions, we can read those into the record and continue on this evening. If their feeling is that there's a need for more discussion or more information, it is an option to continue the hearing. If you decide that the application does not meet some of the approval criteria and it needs to be denied, then that is another option. We would need to get some direction about alternative findings in that case. So with that, I guess I'll ask if the commission has any questions, and I'll stop sharing whatever I've been sharing wherever I've been sharing it here for that discussion.
Are there any clarifying questions from the commission for staff?
Yeah, I think just one from me. You had mentioned that its designation as part of the downtown area is probably something that doesn't make sense, but that's not, we're reviewing it in the context of the downtown design requirements, and there's no further action like beyond that that's being proposed by staff, right? I don't know if that makes sense, but that was sort of just like an aside that it probably doesn't make sense to have it zoned as such.
Right. I think probably what we'll need to do at some point in the future, in the near future, is revisit the zoning of the site and see what might be an appropriate alternative to rezone it, because we are aware that the applicant team will be coming again in the next 3 to 5 years with some additional improvement projects, and it seems like it'd be nice to not have to do this again if we don't have to.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's helpful.
Any other questions for Brett?
I have a question about my reading of the plans. So this is probably going to be best answered by the applicant, but I wasn't able to locate where the bike parking was going to be on the site plan. So I saw where kind of there'd be a golf cart parking and charging on the back, where all the vehicular parking is, but I didn't see specifically noted where the bike parking would be. So I was hoping that could get pointed out.
Yeah, fair question. I think maybe the applicant team can address that. I don't believe any bike parking was shown on the initial plans, and that's one of the proposed conditions of approval, is just to install a bike rack.
Oh, okay.
We had an idea about trying to locate it near the existing building entrance, if there's room there, but that's something that I think we're open to discussing with the applicant about what might be an appropriate location.
Understood. So it's not currently on the plans.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I also had one additional question just about, this again might be good for the applicant. I'm not sure if that's something I should wait to raise.
Yeah, what kind of the way the process works is that they will present, and then you can ask
perfect.
them questions. There's this whole formality to.
Thank you, Laura.
Yes, you're welcome.
No additional questions for you, Brett.
Just I have a quick question or two, Brett. And so as presented, it appears that this is not an intensification of the use at all. It's just a reconfiguration of space that involves a small expansion on either end of this existing building.
Correct. Yeah. Our understanding is that this doesn't represent any intensification of use of the site. It's really kind of a reorganization or consolidation of some of the existing functions on the site.
And then, despite the lengthy findings, ultimately, those three aspects of the application, that are packaged with the downtown design review, are non-discretionary. As you said, they're type 1. There's nothing there for us to really consider in our deliberations tonight.
Right. That's correct, in terms of what discretion the commission has.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, have we received any correspondence on this matter other than those items included in the meeting packet?
We have not.
Okay, would the applicant or their representative like to make a presentation or comment?
I think they would, so I'll invite them to come up to the presentation table. They've sent a PowerPoint presentation that I don't know if it'll be any different this time, but I will get that queued up. I'll encourage them to remember that when you are speaking, just hit the button and so you see the red light on the microphone, and give me 1 second and I'll try to get this queued up.
Before we get started, can those speaking please introduce themselves with their names and cities of residence?
Chair Edge, just to confirm, can you see the full PowerPoint presentation now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Chair Edge and Commissioners. My name is Greg Geist. I'm the Director of Clackamas Water and Environment Services, and I happen to live in Portland. Thank you for your time tonight. I really appreciate it. Next slide. Oh, I should mention we are talking about 1974 Water Resource Recovery Facility. If you walk into that facility today, you will walk into 1974. It's pretty interesting, actually. And it's a water resource recovery facility because it does three things. It makes clean water that we send out to the river. It makes biosolids, which is a natural fertilizer that are used on agricultural fields in Eastern Oregon. And it makes energy. And that energy piece is ultimately kind of the driver of this project. And I'll get to that. Next slide. So just a little bit of context about who we are. I mean, sorry, previous slide. Yeah, this one. Our vision, we want to be a collaborative partner. We are both serve this community and we are part of this community. And so we do things like have a good neighbor fund that funds improvements in the park. It pays for some of the debt funding for the Milwaukie Bay Park. We work with the Island Station Neighborhood Association. We're doing the, Porch Fest. We're going to have a Porch Fest band out in the park. So anyway, we're happy to be part of the community. We want to fit in. We want to make sure that we're an amenity and people value us. We've also done a ton of odor work over the years, and hopefully folks who've been around a while notice that it doesn't really stink anymore, which is wonderful. Next slide. So yeah, we do facilities planning out 40 years for our facilities, for our collection system, for our surface and stormwater management. So we really need to know, what we need to build, when we need to build it, and how we're going to pay for it. So this is part of a larger project. We've invested quite a bit already in the Kellogg facility, and we will be investing a lot more, and I'll talk about that in just a second. Can you do the next slide, please? So the one I want to call attention to is the last bullet, the digester improvements and dewatering. If you look at the overhead there, the facilities that are orange or blue are the ones that we're going to be addressing over the next number of years. In the next 4 to 5 years, we want to do, that's kind of the basics of the context of why we're here and what we're ultimately trying to do. It'd be nice to have a remodeled building, but it is part of a larger plan for that facility to continue to serve this community far into the future.
Good evening. My name is Shem Harding with DECA Architecture. We are the architect for the project, and we've been working with Wes since 2020, 2021 to look at this site and create a design that helps them get to where they need to be with their process. Greg alluded to being a good neighbor, and we have met with the Island Station Neighborhood Association about this project. We presented it to them. We've had a little bit of discussion about certain aspects and made a couple of revisions in response to that. So we really are trying to engage with the neighborhood and create a design that everybody can be proud of. It was mentioned this campus was built in 1974. And I think there's been several upgrades to the infrastructure part and process parts of the campus over the years, but this administration building has remained untouched. And so this is really due for some upgrading. The areas of the staff the areas in this building are primarily working areas, office areas, and those areas just haven't, they've lasted a good 50 years. So this building is really due for some updating and modernization. When we started this design process, the goal was to really optimize the functionality of the site. And so the goal of this design is to take all the people spaces, the working spaces that people actually spend their days in, and move them to the administration building. And you can see on the slide there at the far left-hand corner, that's the administration building. It kind of faces the park with the plant behind it. And so moving these areas up there is really what's going to be best for the efficiency of the plant. It's going to create potential future opportunities for operational efficiency when those buildings that Greg mentioned goes in. It will reduce truck traffic to the site and increase efficiency. So really a benefit all around. And we also saw an opportunity for this building to provide a public benefit with some public use spaces. And if you can go to the next slide. Thank you. The existing administration building is fairly constrained. It's hemmed in on all sides by features that are challenging to navigate from a design standpoint. So to the north, you have the park and the parking lot, some significant trees. To the west, you have the primary vehicle access to the site. To the south, the aeration basins and the process areas of the plant. And so really, one of the only significant places to add on to this building is on the east side. And you can see in red there the proposed footprint of the major addition, but it also is over part of the habitat conservation area. And so we're dealing with that, performing some mitigation. It is allowed. That intrusion into the habitat conservation area is very small compared to the amount on the site, and so it's allowed by right. Next slide. Oh, there you go. So this is the existing building as viewed from the north. From what you see, this is the view you'd see in the park. It doesn't have a lot of glazing. It doesn't present a very welcoming facade. It's kind of has a darker coloration and it's shaded by these trees. And so a lot of the moves we're making are to try and open up that facade and create a more welcoming aspect as it faces that public park. Next slide. So this is the floor plan right now. It has a lot of outdated features that don't fit the way that Kellogg currently operates. For instance, the lab space is too big, and it has some office spaces, working spaces that aren't really being used, such as that lab office. The restrooms are really too small to support tours and some of the other activities that occur here. And the offices are very tight. They don't have views southward to the plant. They face north into the park. And then there are separate locker rooms further south in the chem building, but they're very outdated with a very large locker room for men and pretty much a janitor's closet locker room for women. So a big part of our design is creating equitable locker rooms for both genders. Next slide. So the new plan solves a lot of these problems. You can see we've added a large dedicated conference room and lunchroom addition to the east. And we saw the opportunity to divide those two spaces with a movable partition. And the idea is that these could open up and function as a single large meeting room that could be used for community use or other public uses. We've created a foyer with dedicated restrooms to support that function. So if there was a public event here, it would have access to restrooms. It would have an entry that's secure from the user areas of the plant. Oh. And you can see we've created additional office space facing south into the plant and converted that carport at the west end into locker rooms that are adequate for all of the west staff. Next slide. Brett showed this briefly, but what we really wanted to focus our design work on was creating a compatible design that also supports the public realm. We see that park to the north is the primary public face of this building. Our addition continues the existing roof line to integrate the addition in with the existing massing. We're using a lot of glass to make that facade feel welcoming and light, brightening up the palette a little bit to make this building feel a little bit more vibrant in this shaded area, and screening our new rooftop mechanical equipment from public view. We're also doing a lot of work with landscaping. Next slide. So I mentioned that the addition is partially intruding into the habitat conservation area, and we are following the mitigation procedures for that addition by planting, I think, close to 30 new native trees and 120 shrubs. Most of those new plantings we're choosing to put in the river park and some of the riparian areas down there. We're also we're removing some dead trees, we're removing some invasive species, so we're doing as much as we can to support that riparian environment. And so we think this design, is really compatible with the existing building, with the plant. It reinforces the public realm at this site without affecting the views to the river or the natural character of the site. I think it provides a better sense of enclosure for the southern end of the park, and it really embraces the spirit of a lot of the design guidelines that are associated with the DMU zoning. And so I would welcome any questions about the design or other thoughts or comments.
Do any commissioners have questions for the applicant? I can't see anybody right now, so feel free to just chime in.
Yes, I have a question about, I noticed in the renderings when it's talking about the materials on the exterior that you're utilizing a lot of existing material, and then there's obviously the introduction of new material. I agree with your statement that it really blends with the existing building, which was really nice to see. I think it blends well with that while also being kind of its own distinctive addition, which is nice to see it distinctive from the original. But I was curious what some of the methodology was behind determining which of the exterior materials to replace and which to keep. I see there's some notes about repairing some things and then some notes about, changing them entirely. I was just kind of curious if you did a condition assessment that kind of helped understand what materials could remain or how confident you feel those can remain.
Yeah, there's the campus as a whole has some really great design features. Yeah. There's about 13 buildings there. They were all built at the same period of time. There's some really high quality finished materials used. One of the main features that we are trying to preserve and celebrate is the precast concrete panels. So they're these ribbed precast concrete panels that are sandblasted. They're really beautiful, kind of 1970s era concrete. We're not proposing new concrete panels as part of our addition, but we are proposing a plaster stucco facade finish that speaks to that existing material. One of the other character defining features of the existing buildings on the campus, and I don't know if you could go to the rendering, I could point it out, but there is most of the buildings on the campus have a fascia at the top that it's kind of that darker brown band across the top, and that's a feature of all the buildings out there on site. It was originally done as a natural wood finish. It's been reclad, I believe, in the 90s with an aluminum pre-finished material, but that's something that all the buildings have that make them feel part of a family, so that's something we're trying to integrate without necessarily recreating it. It is a little dark and heavy in some locations, so we're doing a thinner version of that. Does that start to answer your question a little bit?
Certainly. I noticed there are some areas where it said, going to replace the siding entirely. Some places it's just repairing and repainting. So I was just kind of curious if you'd actually done an assessment on, those materials that are just going to be repainted, that they are in the condition, to be able to just be repainted.
The siding's not in too, the lower portion of the siding is not in too bad a shape throughout the campus. It is faded and stained, and so I think we're repainting all of that as part of the project.
Okay, so that's been considered. So yeah, yes, that answers my question. Thank you.
Chair Edge, if I may. One question, I'm just curious what design considerations you've adopted from the input you received from the neighborhood association meeting.
Yeah, the bulk of our conversation with the neighborhood was regarding the trees, the mitigation tree plantings in the park. So the neighborhood association was concerned about the placement of trees. So we moved a few trees around to preserve views for some existing sight lines and some existing homeowners. The neighborhood association was very concerned about the ecological character of the riverbank. So they had requested, we're removing some invasive black locust trees. They requested that those be kept as snags. And so that's really the intent, some more feasible than others, but the intent is to preserve and protect and create new habitat. There were some comments about tree species. So there are some specific tree species being used that respond to some of those concerns. But most of the comments were about the park and the trees.
Any other questions from the commission?
I have just a quick question, also sort of a curiosity, but so you said that you produce energy, I guess in what form? Is that biosolids or is that methane? And then you also said that part of the future vision is going to reduce the number of truck trips to that area. Could you just talk about that a little bit more and how that actually happens?
Sure. I don't know if you picked out on one of the aerials, there's large cylindrical buildings, and those are million-gallon tanks, and the solid material through the treatment process is separated and sent to those tanks where it's digested, just similar to a stomach, produces methane gas. We burn that gas in an engine, and that's used to heat the digesters themselves. And in the future, but the consistency of the material in those tanks is pretty liquidy, and so we have to run 5 to 6 semi-trucks out of that facility every day to our other facility to thicken it before it goes to Eastern Oregon. So we want to add a more efficient gas recovery system, more efficient engine generator, and thickening facility at that facility so we don't have to run as many trucks out.
Great, thanks for clarifying.
Okay, if there's no other questions from the commission, I'd just like to thank the applicant for their testimony and yeah, thank you for your time. So we will now recognize those persons submitting public testimony on the application. Has anyone joined the meeting that wishes to testify?
No, we don't have anybody here to testify.
Okay. Then we'll just move on to the public testimony portion of the hearing on the proposed addition to the West Facility Admin Building, primary file DR-2024-002 is now closed. Is the commission ready for discussion?
Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So as we heard from Brett, there's a package of applications, including natural resources reviews, Willamette Greenway review, downtown design review, but only the downtown design guidelines are discretionary. So we should really focus our deliberations on those elements of the application that are discretionary. And while also considering that this is an existing use that is not really being intensified with the proposed development. So with that in mind, is there anyone on the commission that would like to lead us off?
Chair Edge, if you may, I just want to go ahead and put my support out there for this project. I think the applicant did an excellent job in addressing our downtown design guidelines, even though it was maybe a difficult building to work with. The style carries through. There's an attempt that was made and done well. So again, I appreciate the efforts that went into that. And the presentation was helpful, and again, appreciate what we've been brought. So thanks.
Yeah, I can quickly jump in. I would largely agree. I think it's seems like a good project, and the criteria seem to be met. And I appreciate the presentation from the applicant and staff's report as well, kind of clearly laying out the guidelines and the findings. So thank you. I would also be in support of it.
I would also like to add, I also feel in support of this as well. After reviewing all of the contents and what's been provided, I think that a very strong attempt was made to meet the design guidelines and the, the intent of them. And I think that was really nice to see, in particular because this is really the front-facing building that folks will see. Folks who are interacting with the park, folks who are interacting with the trolley trail. I have lived in this area my entire life, and I've really never seen behind the curtain, and I probably never will, but I do see the front of this building pretty frequently. And in addition to going and visiting the site, I looked at it from, Google Street View and looking at it from cars and the vehicular connection to this area. I think it's actually going to be a really, it's going to add, well, visually, to the interaction from the street level and to the interaction from the pedestrian level. So I appreciate the presentation as well. Thank you.
Thank you all for your comments. Yeah, I agree with really everything I've heard so far. I think that the applicants done a very good job of striving to meet really the relevant design guidelines, and the result looks, really good. And it's definitely an improvement. And when we have, a legal non-conforming use, we always just hope that, when there's an application that we bring the development more into compliance. And I really think that they're meeting that objective with doing what's being proposed. So I'm happy to support this as well tonight. And yeah, I don't need to rehash everything that everyone's already said. I think we're all in support of moving this forward. So I will entertain a motion.
I would like to make a motion to approve public hearing item DR 2024-002 as presented.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion before voting? Okay, then all those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you. I'm hearing unanimous support. The application package for primary file DR-2024-002 is approved. If anyone wishes to appeal the Commission's decision to the City Council, you must make application stating the grounds for your appeal within 15 days of the mailing of the notice of decision. Please see planning staff for details. And that takes us into our work session item. So again, just briefly, thank you to the applicant team. Thanks for coming in and giving a presentation. We do appreciate that, as shared by some of the other commissioners. So yeah, Brett, it's the work session item is to receive a second update and discuss the project to update the Natural Resources Code. Senior Planner Brett Kelver will present the information for discussion.
Before Brent jumps in, I just want to say, I know that this is really technical and really in the kind of the weeds. And I know this also, we're all kind of learning this together, this code. It's really detailed. So feel free, like what we've been doing is we originally came with the tree code, or talking about the trees in the natural resource review. And we worked through some of those things. And now we're going to talk about the WQR, and we'll get your questions and your comments, and then we'll do our best to bring this back and explain it to you more. So it's a really iterative process. We're just kind of like gearing up, walking you through everything so that ultimately we'll get to a hearing where we can adopt it, hopefully, and recommend it to City Council. But just, we understand this is highly technical, and so no question is a bad question. So feel free to ask as much as you need to understand what it is that we're trying to kind of suss out through this code package.
Okay. Well, I want to apologize again. I feel like I'm driving this bus and I'm not quite sure I got the right license for it. So I will have to troubleshoot this for the next time because I'm not sure. Oh, can you turn the maybe I'll back up. We'll try to figure that out. I'm not sure what, Joseph, I'm just curious if during the applicant's presentation, were you continuing to see the next slide kind of view, or were you actually starting to see just a single slide? I'm just curious for.
I was seeing the correct single slide view for most of the presentation, but then at some point the window got minimized and it went away, and then it was, you know, more kind of like desktop and other windows. And so then I just switched back to the active speaker view and I was able to see full screen.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. All right. Let me try sharing this and we'll see what happens here. Okay. Joseph, are you seeing a single slide or are you seeing?
I am seeing the single slide, yeah.
Amazing. I have no idea how that's happening. I don't think I did anything differently, but okay. All right. So what we're doing now is this is part two. This is the second installment of some work sessions that we're having to try to get ourselves all together about some amendments that we are planning to make by the end of the year to the Natural Resources Code. So certainly with newer members on the commission, there's a learning curve, and we haven't had a lot of hardcore natural resource applications come through over the last few years. So I think for all of us, there's a little bit of refreshing and remembering how all these things work. So with that in mind, our first session, we talked a little bit about the tree code, and we wanted to focus this discussion on moving more into the Natural Resources Code itself. But with that said, I want to give you an update, and I'll just summarize what was in the staff report for this in response to some of the issues and questions that were brought up by the commission at our April work session. So one issue was a note that the tree permit, the residential tree permit process currently is using the label type 1 and type 2. Numerals for whatever that's worth, but that moniker, which is confusing for those of us who are working with the land use code because we have type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, type 5. So our suggestion, and after a couple of go-rounds with the urban forestry folks, they did agree to that it would be relatively easy for them to change their labeling to type A and B. So for whatever that's worth, hopefully that'll avoid some confusion in the future. I would say probably a key question or consideration or suggestion from the commission last time was to, if it couldn't be negotiated, to let the Natural Resources Code kind of win the day over the tree code in natural resource areas that are on residential properties. The idea being if there was a way to leave it with just one level of review instead of needing to get two permits or two types of review. And I think we have sorted out some compromises with the urban forestry program that essentially will allow us to do that for the most part, when we're dealing with trees being removed in natural resource areas and residential sites, that with a few caveats, they're comfortable letting the Natural Resource Code win. I think that some of the differences come forward with some of these next bullet points. One example is in the Natural Resource Code, removing a tree that requires type 1 or administrative review, there's a pretty clear one-for-one replanting requirement with an allowance that if someone can demonstrate they've planted some trees in advance of the removal and or that the site, kind of like this sewage treatment plant site, already has a lot of trees on it and there's not really a lot of room, that there's the ability of the Natural Resource Code to say, that's fine, you don't have to do a replanting. The tree code includes some mitigation fees. They have some similar considerations that if there's a lot of shading already or a lot of existing canopy, they will also allow someone not to have to replant a tree, but there are also some mitigation fees that kick in for them. And I think in some cases they wanted to retain the ability to collect those, especially where we're dealing with trees on city-owned sites. That's kind of similar to a consideration or a concern they had with the natural resource management plan. If an applicant goes through our process of presenting a management plan for their natural resource area, where they're saying, I'm going to do like a restoration project. It's going to involve removing some trees, but I'm also going to do all this replanting. And we've had some cases here at the mouth of Johnson Creek where there have been large woody debris has been installed in the stream, and it's involved maybe removing some invasive plants and some trees. And what the Natural Resource Code would like to do to make it easier for those situations is to have when the applicant can present a plan that's been approved, that we don't have to deal with the minutia of the tree removal, the one-for-one replacement, that kind of thing, that it's kind of a package. And there was some concern from the urban forestry folks that that even though we had tried to make it easy with allowing, if you have a plan that's been approved already by like a state or federal agency that has expertise, in that case, we wanted to say, you've already had the experts look at it. We don't need to make the process any more difficult. There was some discomfort and an unease, I think, from the urban forestry folks who are granted, they are looking at canopy and trying to establish canopy, and they have some different considerations about that, and they were concerned that they not lose their voice entirely in that. And so part of the negotiation that we had was essentially that if there's a natural resource management plan and the tree removal aspect of it would already fit their criteria for a type A residential tree permit, that they were fine letting there not be a secondary review. But if not, they wanted to kind of get pulled back in. So I think the effort there, or the result, is that some minimization of overlap and redundancy, but acknowledging that there are just some parts where there's a legitimate interest or need for them to kind of stay involved. So we can see how that works moving forward, and there may be some, some adjustment that can be made in the future with a little more experience. And one of the items that was brought up was we had made a note that as part of the initial trying to merge the natural resource code with the tree code, when the tree code was new, when it was first adopted, we ended up inadvertently losing our 6-inch diameter of breast height threshold for what is considered a tree. And so we want to reintroduce that. And there had been, I think, a fair question about whether we should think any differently about in particular native trees. So should we make it so easy for someone to simply remove a native species tree, which we generally want in our natural resource areas? I mean, 6 inches, if you think about it, is pretty big, and especially depending on the species, like a slow-growing oak tree at 2 inches could actually be pretty old, and it takes a long time to get to that point. So it seems fair, and we'll look into this a little bit more, and I think we'll talk more with our on-call natural resource consultant, the ESA folks, to see what their recommendation is about some particular numbers. But I think there's a recognition that we might take advantage of the opportunity to just specify a little bit with native species trees. So we want to be a little bit more protective of those, not make it quite so easy to do that. So I guess with that, I wanted to ask if anyone had any questions or further thoughts about the tree aspect, understanding that we want to kind of continue to move forward into the next part of this, but this is a time if there's something else that you're not clear about or wanted to respond to from the materials or had another thought about it, be interested in hearing.
I think these bullet points help summarize, again, what we discussed. I also, since that meeting, I always go back to, I think, that map that showed all the natural resource areas in the city and how scant it is as compared to the entire city is covered by the tree code.
Yes.
So keeping that in mind, and it may be helpful for us to keep seeing that moving forward, just to remind us, but that's all. So.
Just one question for clarification. Who is the on-call specialist?
So currently our on-call natural resource consultant is ESA.
Oh, it
from
is the ESA.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
familiar with them.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. I appreciate getting the feedback on this, and hearing that there's this is a pretty good compromise. It sounds like compared to where we started, and so this feels pretty good. ultimately, again, I think that, particularly when there's a particular approved plan in place for a site, I think we want to continue to make it as easy as possible for whoever's responsible for implementing that plan or managing, the site to, to fulfill the plan that has been approved. And so we'll just keep monitoring this as we go. But, if there is anywhere that I would say, and to continue to push a little harder or push back a little bit more, it would be on just trying to make sure that, again, an approved plan gets as little friction as possible from the city as the plan is being delivered.
Okay. Yeah, we'll keep that in mind and keep asking about that. Thank you. All right, well, moving along, I think that a key point for tonight's discussion, one of the main things that in fact is kind of to some degree one of the big engines driving this project is in the context of some of the recent changes to state law that have been attempting to kind of remove or lower barriers to housing development. It was recognized that the importance of providing a clear and objective track for some housing development was running into a problem with, in particular, our water quality resource regulations. They were established, far earlier than the habitat conservation area rules were. Those HCA rules did kind of come into place with a clear and objective track built in, kind of with the same idea in mind. And so we need to establish some kind of non-discretionary, clear and objective path for housing development. That said, it doesn't have to be broad. It doesn't have to, it can be conservative. It can be pretty narrow. And my feeling and approach with going into this is that we have long viewed, I think, water quality resource areas as being more protective than the habitat conservation areas. The two areas overlap. But from the beginning, the water quality resource areas have, just by their nature, generally pretty quickly required discretionary review. And for whatever it's worth, I think having the word quality in the description, I guess, itself suggests a little bit of discretion. I think although you can certainly quantify how you measure water quality, I think part of the recognition was that a challenge with trying to make a clear and objective path for that is that, one option would be to make someone do a very in-depth, detailed analysis that hits certain benchmarks that are set, and that isn't really what we thought would work best here. And so what we tried to do, I think, was acknowledge that these are important areas to continue to protect. They tend to be, the closest to the water features, within 50 feet usually, and kind of looking at, I guess, a distinction. And what I'd use as an example to describe a little bit more the clear and objective path for HCA disturbance is actually fairly limited itself. It really depends a lot on how much HCA is on a site to begin with, because the allowance is you can disturb up to 50% of the HCA on the site or 5,000 square feet, whichever is less. But there's a formula that comes into play that takes into consideration how much HCA is on the site. So a site with a lot of HCA on it, the idea is it's pretty encumbered. It seems to make sense that you should have a path to kind of make some kind of disturbance to get reasonable use without overly impacting the resource. Where the property doesn't have a lot of HCA, the idea is you should have a lot of space to do what you need to do. So that formula, it is clear and objective, and if you do the math, we haven't done an analysis on all the sites in the city, but I would guess that it's probably a minority of properties that would be able to really take advantage of that, of residential properties. Sorry, the case we heard tonight, the sewage treatment plant, a non-residential use, the allowance is just for a straight 10% disturbance. So with that in mind, I mean, again, it is still fairly narrow, and I think a distinction between the two resource types, again, the water quality resource is focused on maintaining water quality for these protected features, but it's also underlaid with the habitat area because it is habitat. And so it's worth noting that even though we're supposed to be focused on water quality, that the water quality resource areas never go away. They're based on a measurement. It's always, for most of the city, it's 50 feet from the top of bank. And even if you disturb it, we're not carving around the new house. The house, for example, that's built in the water quality resource area is always there. Whereas the HCA, it is about the resource itself. It's about habitat, and habitat can go away. Whereas water quality, we're always still concerned with. And so that's one of the differences, I think, between the two resources, and what I think makes it a little bit challenging to try to figure out what is a sensible, workable route. What we have proposed, and based on looking at some other parts of our existing natural resource code, for some exempt activities, for some activities requiring type 2 review, we decided to propose one, I think, important criterion is to say that this path would be available when we're talking about the actual establishment of a housing unit. So someone just adding on a bedroom, for example, or a family room to an existing house, that's not creating a new housing unit. That's not really getting at what the spirit, I think, of the state charge is, to try to remove those barriers. So our proposal is to be very specific about either an accessory dwelling unit or an actual new primary unit being created with that disturbance. And looking at the threshold that we have right now for type 2 review for water quality resource disturbance, it's 150 square feet. And so the idea was, well, if that was what would get you into type 2 review, we're trying to make this a little bit easier, let's keep that same number and say that under these conditions, new housing unit, if it's 150 square feet, we're making it a little bit easier for you. And then trying to retain some sense of protection, with the classifications of water quality resource that are out there. The idea was if it's good, that is, if it has a high degree of existing vegetation, the idea is we do want to continue to be protective and limit disturbance there. And the separation threshold of 30 feet from the top of bank or 50 feet from edge of wetland, that's based on some existing thresholds that are in the code. And the proposal to, limit it to no native species tree removal and no increase in direct stormwater discharge. At least some of that is based on other thresholds that are in the code. So I think what we'll want to do with this is run it by the folks at the Department of Land Conservation and Development. They're, talking with a lot of jurisdictions about how we're all trying to meet these standards, and we're hoping they can give us some feedback on whether this seems like a workable approach. But that said, I guess we were curious to see if any of the commissioners had thoughts or questions about this approach.
Just have one question. So the rationale here makes sense to me, and I appreciate you explaining this, kind of the highlights step by step. The one thing that stood out was where it says not categorized as Class A or good within the notes for this, within the, the formal term for the document that we, staff report, thank you. Within the staff report, it talks about having some issues with the label of good and how it needs perhaps better definition. So would the redefining of what good is, or having that better definition of what good is, be a part of this as well? So, utilizing this term of good, are we going to also see this good be better defined in addition to making this change? I'm just curious how those two relate with each other.
Yes, I think part of the proposal and looking at that issue of the categorization of the water quality resource areas, the suggestion or recommendation is to consider thinking about invasive species, which would essentially, if we apply it how I guess it's kind of being suggested to all of those categories, to say right now the distinctions are based on percentages of canopy cover without any consideration of who's making up the canopy. Is it natives? Is it invasives? Is it, non-native, non-invasives? And that's where I think recognizing that when it was first established as protection of water quality, while recognizing that it had this habitat function, that's what I think the habitat conservation area, when it was developed, came in to more directly protect. But the water quality resource area has that function too, and especially with the overlaying of those two things, it does seem reasonable to say, maybe it is time to, since the HCA especially cares about native versus invasive, even if 100% vegetation is of blackberries, for example, is probably still better than 0% vegetation, that it is worth making a distinction. And maybe we make like an excellent category or something, or maybe the top couple layers include some consideration of the native versus invasive species. But yeah, I think to answer your question, yes, I think whatever we end up deciding to try to adjust with the categorization, the idea would be at least the top level of it should be out of bounds for this clear and objective track.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Are there other questions from the commission for Brett right now about this part? Okay, I have a couple. So the first thing I was wondering is that with respect to the water quality resource areas, that is really meant to implement, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's really meant to implement statewide land use planning goal 6 for water quality, which I believe is particularly relevant for a city like Milwaukee that relies on well water for water supply, drinking water supply.
Yes, I think the WQR rules are related to goal 6, I believe, yeah. Okay,
so it just, you know, these rules apply throughout the metro area, you know, in some form or another, depending on how the local jurisdiction implements it. But not everybody relies on well water for municipal drinking water. So it's particularly important, I think, here in Milwaukee that we, you know, particularly for the type 1, you know, kind of administratively approved applications, that we set a high bar for our water quality resources, and you know, and make sure that we're focused on, and this leads into my next question or comment. There's, you know, that we're with respect to these regulations, that we're focused on the water quality aspects, and not simply. And so with respect to native species, I think it'd be important to establish a nexus between the presence of invasive species and or water quality outcomes. You know what I mean, or vice versa, the presence of native species and you know the you know resulting you know better water quality outcomes. And so I just want to make sure that you know we're basing the regulations on, you know, kind of defensible evidence for the policy outcome, you know, for what we're trying to do with this regulation. And also with that in mind, this also has to play nice. It has to implement metro regulations around the same, really, I mean, how metro jurisdictions have to implement the statewide, you know, land use planning goal that we were just talking about. And so when we're looking at, you know, the classifications of HCA or WQR, you know, I think there's something related to those classifications and kind of mapping that to a, you know, some kind of, I mean, I feel like there's, I'm just not remembering in the Metro Functional Plan, the Urban Growth Functional Plan, that there's something about the classification of the HCA or WQR and like development value or, something to that effect. And so not that you won't or already haven't, but I just want to make sure that we're, if we're changing the classification system, that we're thinking about how that relates to Metro's urban growth management functional plan, and that we're not inadvertently doing something that we don't intend to do there. So if you want to comment on that really quick, go ahead, and then otherwise I'll move into my next.
I think that's a really good point. I also think, and correct me, Brett, we talked to Metro about this, and this has been one of the kind of the ongoing conversations that we've had, I think, about how our wetlands inventory and how all this got established. And our code was based on model code that was developed by Metro based on the state. And that was quite some time ago. And so there's been some information, I think, that's been lost in translation over time from what the model code was into how we're measuring things now, but we've been trying to work through that a little bit. And I do take your point in that we should go back and just revisit that and not inadvertently move away from anything that we should be, and also continue to reach out to Metro a little bit through this process, because we did talk to them earlier in this process to try to get a better understanding of how those data layers were being managed in relation to what our maps look like and what the code looks like. So we've had lots of conversations when we started this project trying to understand how this works. And so we will continue to have those conversations with Metro as we go through this process.
Perfect. So then I also was wondering, I had shared this question with staff before the meeting, but I was wondering if you have any comments at this point about the possibility of a variable minimum buffer standard, or a minimum buffer standard that scales with the size of a lot. Since 50 feet tends to be kind of the recognized, best practice. And, like I was saying, we kind of want our by right disturbance of WQR to have to clear a pretty high bar. And so I would look at what the best practice is of kind of like the minimum high bar to clear, generally speaking. So are you able to speak to, kind of why we might want 30 feet instead of 50 feet? And if there's a way to make sure that if 50 feet is available, that we're allowing at least that much.
Right. I think that I mentioned earlier that the delineation or the identification of a water quality resource area is based in some part on slope, and a starting measurement point from like top of bank or the edge of a delineated wetland. In Milwaukie, I think we don't have very much in the way of extreme slopes. So the way that our water quality resource areas tend to be identified is with the basic 50-foot measurement from top of bank or edge of a delineated wetland. And so you're not giving very much if you stick with a 50-foot threshold, because at 50 feet, you start to be out of the water quality resource area. And so you're not really allowing for some disturbance of that area because you're pushing people just to the edge of it or outside of it. And so I think that's, part of the rationale with one of the places that we find and that existing 30-foot measurement. I think it's an allowance for like an addition or some modification to an existing building that's within a water quality resource area, as long as it, that new disturbance is not more than 30 feet away from the top of bank. And so I think, again, that the point is, it's not a break, or it's not an assist if it is out of the water quality resource area. And so I think by the nature or definition of our areas, if we're not giving an opportunity at less than 50 feet, we're not really giving an opportunity, I think. And it's something that I think we'll want to revisit with even just this current standard that says 30 feet from top of bank or 50 feet from the edge of a wetland, because again, at 50 feet, you start to be, for wetlands, it seems like you start to be out of the water quality resource area. But it may be that we need to understand a little bit more about, is there a different consideration of, impacts to a wetland at 50 feet versus 30 feet. So to get to your part of your question about an allowance for different consideration of, let's say, small lots that don't have a lot of room to get away from a water quality resource area versus ones that are much larger properties, I think it's worth looking at that to see if maybe even if it's what we've proposed, saying you get this type 1 review if you're 30 feet, your project is at least 30 feet away, if you're a lot that's no deeper than 100 feet or something like that. Or, I don't know, exploring, like, I think your point was to say, if you're a really big site, can't you find somewhere else to be than in a water quality resource area? So why should you get this break, or why should we make it easy for you? And I think we'll just need to look at that a little bit more and hypothesize a little bit, or kind of look at to see if we have some past cases. I mean, it might be something like, for a site really large that's trying to do housing, it's probably going to be trying to do either like a cottage cluster project now or a multi-unit apartment kind of thing. And so, again, we just don't have a lot of cases like that to fall back on. But I guess if we can think a little bit about what might be an issue, what might be a reason why you would need to take advantage of that. And I guess too, the thing with a larger site is there's still, we weren't proposing any flex on the 150 number for a larger site. So at the end of the day, it's still a pretty small allowance. If I am trying to do a big apartment complex and the best you're going to do is give me 150 square feet of disturbance, if it's 30 feet away from top of bank, maybe it's like, fine, it doesn't matter how big you are, it's still such a small, relatively, it's a different proportion, right? It's 150 square feet might be a lot more for me if I'm a 5,000 square foot lot. So I don't know if the suggestion would be to think about not giving that break to a larger site, but I don't know. I think, again, we also have so few examples of this. And I think that Laura and I were talking about this earlier. I mean, I think we, in terms of trying to strike the balance between making this code be like really, really perfect for all scenarios, when we really just don't have that many come in. We don't want to miss some big things, but it may just be that maybe there's a way for us to think a little bit about what we've got and what are the most realistic scenarios that we might run into.
Well, it might be a useful exercise to kind of like take a small lot and then take a larger lot and just compare it, right? And look at what the impacts would be. So just choose examples. And so we can work through that analysis a little bit and tell you, and come back to you with some thoughts and ideas about it.
I like to jump to that. That'd be great. So then that kind of leads into my next question on the same topic, which is relating to land divisions and middle housing land divisions. And, ultimately, because we've been very liberal with, how we allow middle housing to occur on sites. And so, one thing that can basically happen is that you can get a detached plex that's almost a cottage cluster or almost a traditional subdivision just on, maybe what would be less than standard sized lots. Or maybe if it's on a big lot, I don't know, maybe you are putting in a detached quadplex on, an acre and a half site, and that, maybe that doesn't apply, but you know what I mean? It's like we've provided a lot of flexibility so that regardless of what your site size is, to a large degree, you can deliver middle housing on that site. And so what I'm worried about is, where we would be allowing type 1 disturbances to WQR on sites that have been divided already and should, ideally have addressed WQR in the division review process, if that makes sense. Like, I don't want, double dip, I don't want to give a free pass to just keep chipping away at WQR or allowing, you know, like when there's flexibility, it was basically like we were saying earlier, when there's flexibility to locate out of the WQR or up against the street, ideally we would, you know, the type 1 permit would be involved putting all of the, you know, the development, you know, outside of the WQR area, close to the street, you know, you know, if you're allowed to kind of space out your detached plexes on the site and then do a middle housing land division there, you know, and I'm just wondering about unintended consequences.
And I think, correct me if you all remember this differently, but when we have these types of middle housing land division, we're really talking about, we've got kind of like the parent lot, right? And then you create, I don't know if they're called baby lots. I'm not sure that's the right terminology for it, but you create kind of sublots. But the parent lot still has to adhere to all of the rules of that parent lot. So the overall site, the original site, still has to, well, like I said, adhere to what was established in the beginning. So there isn't, my understanding through that division process, a chipping away that's feasible, because you can't do it on individual lots. You're looking at the larger lot.
Right. I think,
right. Okay. So with middle housing specifically, shouldn't be a concern there.
Well, I think one thing I'm getting out of your question, Chair Edge, is when someone's doing a conventional land division and the site includes WQR or HCA, there's an encouragement. You know, the review process is a little bit easier if you start pulling those resources into like a non-developable tract.
Right.
And since the middle housing land division isn't a conventional land division, it's really intended to be more of almost like a condo kind of thing. The review that we're doing that Laura's talking about is, as a whole, we're looking at this lot, and you're going to do 4 detached units on it, a detached quadplex, say, for example. We're not in the land division part of the Natural Resource Code. Maybe we do need to introduce something there, but the idea is it doesn't mean you're disregarding the natural resources. It just means there's nothing special happening there. It's just we're trying to push those units away from the natural resource area. Maybe you're able to take advantage of like this type 1 HCA disturbance if the math is right, if you've got a lot of resource on the site and you can do some disturbance. But we're going to take that look that Laura's mentioning at the basic zoning and these overlays for that lot, and you're going to build those units, and then you're just going to draw some lines that put them on individual lots, and the resource is where the resource is. You know, a stream side example would be, maybe you do have a little bit of a deep lot and you're putting 2 units closer to the stream and 2 units closer to the site. Well, when you do the middle housing land division, the 2 front ones are going to have 0 resource, and the 2 back ones are going to have all of it. The point of the original conventional land division push was to make it so the natural resource area would not be further impacted. And it is true that with middle housing development, we're not getting that opportunity. I don't know if the state would let us do that with the development of the housing, to say something that you need to do something more than what you're already doing with just a single lot that's not getting divided. But I'm wandering around here. I think I was latching on to what I thought maybe you were trying to express as a concern is the resource being fragmented somehow with middle housing land division, which is supposed to be really easy once you have the units developed. And I think it's true that it could be distributed all kinds of ways depending on the particular site, and not protected in any special way, like by being in a tract, because we just didn't have the opportunity to do that with a conventional thing. What do you think?
As an example, just really quick, you could take a parent lot, you could partition it into 3 lots. Each of those lots could have middle housing on it, and then go through a middle housing land division. So there could be like a detached quadplex on each of those 3 lots, and you still only partitioned the site, and then each of those is an independent middle housing land division. And there's been maybe not so much consideration for isolating the natural resources on the site into their own tract.
Well, not if I'm understanding you right, because if we're starting with a conventional land division, we are getting you to, if you're going to do it the easy way, you're going to put most of the resource in a tract. Or make it, if it's just HCA, make it so none of those 3 new lots that you're creating has, you know, a huge variation.
Area.
Yeah, making sure that one of them doesn't get stuck with all of it. So if, when we have conventional land division involved, I think we do have the opportunity to pull the resource, natural resource out of play for further disturbance. It's when we're—
Even on a simple partition?
Yes, yeah, currently there's the kind of low impact partition option that's in the natural resource code right now is basically, if water quality resource involved, is put 100% of it in a tract and we're good. We're good to go. So.
But again, I think it's another one of those exercises that would be good to go through to see kind of like, let's take a parcel and do a faux middle housing land division that's got natural resources on it and work through that exercise to make sure that we aren't losing anything. And so that we can kind of suss that out in real life as opposed to theoretically.
Because I think that we have, and I mean, I'm not proposing this because this is kind of a policy shift, and we're very happily pro housing. What I'm falling back on is that I seem to remember, like, and Brett, when we talked about this, I think in the late fall, I was getting this confused. But with the natural resource areas, we do still need clear and objective standards or a clear and objective track. But even in, natural resource, goal protected lands, but in the natural resource goal protected lands, we don't necessarily have to accommodate middle housing beyond a duplex. I believe is, a duplex is required on any lot, but middle housing doesn't necessarily have to be accommodated on goal protected land, really intended for goal 10 lands. And I realize that's kind of a nuance, they're zoned residential, they just happen to have some natural resources on them. Not proposing we do anything, they're wildly different, but let's think about the context, and kind of what our wiggle room is in terms of making sure that we aren't losing anything. And again, we do want to allow middle housing and middle housing land divisions on sites that can accommodate them. But I want to make sure we're not losing, we do need to be protecting these other, goal protected lands and making sure that, we're not losing their value. And ultimately we're trying to repair a lot of these goal protected lands from the development that's already occurred. So we just want to be careful that we're not losing that in the process.
Yep, I think that's a point really well taken, and we'll be sure to take, like I said, I think we should just take an example and kind of work through it and make sure we're getting it right. Make sure we're not missing anything.
Excellent. Okay, I've gone through all of my stuff for this part of the presentation. So if there's unless there's any other questions from the commissioners, I think we can continue to move forward.
Sorry, can I just ask a quick question not related to that? So on the mitigation piece, can you just explain to me, I'm a little confused, and this is just from my understanding, because it feels like a water quality resource is like a fixed thing. So how does the mitigation, that's just meant to be like you're doing another good natural resource thing, that's not meant to like replicate the benefits of a water quality resource? Or can you explain like how mitigation works in that context? Does that make sense?
Yeah, let me see if I can restate your question to understand it. Yeah. So you're asking about how mitigation works for disturbance to a water quality resource area depending on its categorization?
Yeah, I guess I'm asking, so we're in this situation where someone is mitigating the disturbance to a water quality resource. We're still losing that water quality resource, right? The mitigation is just a separate step that they're taking, right? Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, I suppose I was, yeah. when I was talking about one way to understand the difference between the water quality resource and the habitat conservation area, in that habitat is a thing, like it's a space that can be built over, like is what is happening with this addition that you were reviewing earlier. It is true that the same thing is happening in a water quality resource area. While I said that the measurement is fixed and that we never change our map to kind of draw around the disturbance that you have, I suppose that comes into play a little bit in a way that's different because the bulk of the regulation there is concerned with water quality. If you try to do things to a developed space in a water quality resource area, the code allows some exemptions for that. Like if you have a house that has a corner, its corner is in the water quality resource area. Clearly that's not habitat where the corner is, but it's still, things that happen in that space could still impact water quality. And so when you want to do something like demo the house, build a new one exactly in that same spot, the code will allow you to do that, I think, if there's no new encroachment into the water quality resource area. If the design also isn't somehow increasing stormwater discharge directly into that area. So it's true that it is still gone, right? It's not habitat. It still could have an impact on water quality depending on what happens there. So mitigation, I guess, really for both of the resource types is about, I guess, trying to enhance the remaining area. Like you're pushed to do your plantings or whatever else might be mitigation within the remaining water quality resource or HCA area on the site. Trying to, I think that the push would be to, especially for the water quality, since we're classifying them as good, marginal, poor, it seems like we're wanting to move things in the direction of being good, so planting more things, increasing the canopy. That should, if it's just about percentage of canopy, it should bump you up maybe into a higher category. I think if you're talking a little bit about some of the mitigation discussion in the staff report with questions about why is there a difference? Why are poor and marginal areas, it seems good enough to just plant some stuff, whereas the good area, for example, is saying, it doesn't even say that explicitly. It's not clear that, oh, you should be planting stuff too. You're disturbing stuff. It happened to be pretty vegetated already. That's what made it good. But the code is wanting a plan for talk to us now about what you're doing is going to, let's talk about what made this kind of such a good area in the first place, how it was relating to things like sedimentation, turbidity in the water, that kind of stuff, which, I mean, I need to try to keep understanding a little bit more about it. It seemed to me a little bit like I don't understand the difference. It seems like maybe it should just be simple enough to say, yeah, plant some more stuff, keep it being good. Or why don't we talk about the plan for dealing with sedimentation, turbidity, all this stuff for any classification of area? They're still water quality resource areas. So it seemed like, I guess it wasn't clear why there's some distinction. So there's a little bit more learning for me to do. I don't know if that's getting at what you were trying to ask about with respect to mitigation and the categorization is good.
Yeah, that definitely gets at it. And I think my question was kind of around the benefits of mitigation in acknowledging a disturbance to a water quality area and how mitigation is kind of making up for that. But I think what you've explained is very helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like you probably would have answered your own question a lot more succinctly, but yeah, I'm gonna.
No, the more info, the more helpful. Thanks.
Well, just to kind of carry you through with that just a little bit deeper, when you develop a site that has WQR on it, if you are not disturbing any of the WQR, you don't have to do anything to the WQR on the site to get your development permit, right? There's no need to clear invasives or remove noxious materials or anything like that. Correct? We don't get anything from you out, towards improving the WQR, the health of the WQR, simply because you're developing a site that happens to have WQR on it.
Correct. You have to mess with the WQR a little bit to start getting into having to do something about improving it.
And so, the mitigation that is required is only required if you disturb the WQR, and it has to match kind of the space, the amount that you're disturbing. But the benefit is that we're kind of getting some improvement at all, because otherwise, they could still just be ivy or blackberries, and we wouldn't require anything. So.
Yeah, there's an irony there of we're not compelling people to improve the water quality resource area on their site unless they disturb it. So you have to kind of damage it a little bit to kind of open the door to getting some mitigation and some improvement to it in a regulatory way.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Anything else before we move on? Go ahead.
You started this conversation with, there's no dumb questions. Here's the dumb question. Do we have a separate wetlands permit? Or this is in place of, this also shows that I work in a lot of different jurisdictions, and I get lost in all the different, is there a separate wetlands application permit for Milwaukie?
You mean if you're disturbing in a wetland area?
Yeah.
No. I mean,
so this is
it.
Great,
right.
Thanks.
Right.
That clears a lot of things up.
Right.
You'd also need a permit from the DSL though, right?
Yes, I guess locally, it would just be natural resource review for us. And then I guess we would need to point an applicant towards, DSL, the Department of State Lands for that. Yeah.
And that's a condition of, or an approval criteria, right? Is that they've gone through the permitting process with DSL?
At least when wetlands are concerned, you at least have to work with DSL on the delineation part of it. And I guess, again, we haven't had a lot of them over time. I'm not sure what else is happening with an applicant there, if they're also having to get some other permit. But at least DSL is notified and is involved in that delineation process. But I'm not clear on what else they do.
Okay, thank you.
I don't have really anything else to share beyond what was in the report. I think the last slide I had was just some of these points that we've talked about, about mitigation questions and dealing with invasives. I think just to be clear, and I want to make sure I'm not missing something here, it seems that now with the middle housing options that the code allows, it's no longer necessary to maintain this residential cluster option. That was something that seemed like, and I think it was, a really good idea at the time when we were adopting the HCA rules. I think we wanted to try to provide some flexibility to allow people to develop to a density that they could otherwise on their site while moving them away from the resource. Since it was adopted, we never had anyone take advantage of it. And now that the options are so much greater with cottage clusters and kind of detached units and whatnot, it seems like it's not really necessary to keep that section of the code. So that's where I just wanted to see if anyone had any other perspective or thought about that, or imagining of a scenario that wouldn't be covered somehow by our current middle housing allowances.
I guess a clarify question. I don't know why I'm.
Go ahead.
So our current middle housing code, we could potentially see projects develop before a replat, correct? Or would we have to approve a replat before any middle housing happens?
Are you talking, when you say replat, are you talking about like a replat for middle housing to put middle housing units on their own lots? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I guess that's what I mean. Okay. I mean, or is there a scenario where you could have multiple units on one parcel? That seems like that's a multifamily development, correct, or no?
No, not necessarily. I think a cottage cluster situation would be the closest to maybe being seeming like a multifamily development, just because of the potential number of units. But for duplex, triplex, quadplex, they could be detached or attached. That's, there's a certain limit there.
And they don't have to be parceled, correct? It can all be on one parcel.
They can all be on one parcel, and people then can, if they want, take that additional step of using the middle housing land division to put them on their own sellable lots, or not. They can keep them all together.
Yeah, again, I think I was just trying to understand the processes or what issues, how that could even be a problem of, you know, the scenario you're talking about of how, like, let's role play and figure out, you know, what the issues would be with. I think another bigger or long-term picture is how is this going to show up on a recorded plat that, you know, this was done first, you know, it was platted before development happened, and so the percentage of water quality resources is in, you know, this sort of, I don't know if that makes sense to me, right, or to you, where I'm getting at, but like, it seems like that could be really sticky, especially like bringing it to the county recorder to say, well, I am allowed to do it here because this was recorded first, but when, I don't know if you're tracking that at all, but I could see that playing out in the long run, and if we could cut that off at the pass, I think that'd be helpful. I don't, again, know if you are tracking.
Yeah, I think that, again, we haven't had very many of them, right? So we're still at the beginning stages of it, right? We've only had a few at this point, or maybe even only 2 or something like that. But I do think it's a good question. And so maybe when we do the exercise of trying to understand some of these other things, we can do the exercise of trying to understand how it would get recorded on the plat, unless you know more about that, Brett, because you love the plats and partitions. It's a specialty.
Well, so to be clear, it feels like you're getting back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier with Chair Edge, what he brought up, that concern about middle housing land development, and are we missing an opportunity to kind of pull or separate off the resources? And so you have to either have built the middle housing units, or you've submitted the permits, gotten them approved, and you're in the process of doing that before we can do a plat for a middle housing land development. As we were noting, like, we don't have a mechanism in the middle housing realm to require separation of the resource out into its own thing. So I think one part of the answer is just, I don't know that the county recorder is, or this county surveyor is going to care that much about, they're not really looking at the resource part like we would be. They're going to see your proposed lines that you're drawing and figure that we've made sure there's only 1 unit on each of these new middle housing lots, and that we took care of whatever else we could in terms of resource stuff. So yeah, I don't know if that's kind of getting it.
You could see someone trying to sell one of those lots that's almost entirely encumbered, because the recorder is going to say, I don't care.
Well, right.
City of Milwaukee's.
I don't think there's a problem. I think what you're asking, I think a simple answer is, I don't think that's an issue, because we're, again, Laura alluded to this earlier, like, we're gonna start by looking at that whole lot, and your proposal to put, let's say, in this example, 4 detached units, and we're gonna apply the natural resource rules and push you back, or make you go through a type 3 review and do all the analysis and alternatives and all that kind of stuff before you can get approval for those units. So there will be some consideration of impacts to resource at that initial development.
So the ability for them to get recorded isn't going to happen before it's gone through the city's.
Right, you can't come in and say, I'm thinking about doing 4 detached units on this lot. I'm going to go ahead and plat that now.
Right, no, it still needs to go through.
And because then we're not talking about a footprint. We don't know where the disturbance is, if that's what you're getting at. Like, no, you have to have, you have to have it already either built or approved. And at that point, if you're going to go ahead and do the plat with just the approval, you know, it's at your own risk. Like, you better not shift the thing around, or you're going to have to come back and do some of this again.
Because you see the sticky wicket of, well, if you do the development before and you try to come back and replat it all, that's when you get into the issue, right? If we're talking about, I just feel like I get stuck in a loop of.
When you say when you do the development and then you plat it to put the units on their own lots, and then you're losing me a little bit at the next, like, what's the next thing that you're saying is happening? Because
then you're going to end up with, if there's existing development, and you want to do a middle housing plat or land division, and there are sites that technically meet some of the critical area, there we go, the water quality resource, if it's in some of that, but in it's okay, it meets our code, before before the land division, and then someone wants to come back and do a land division, and it throws that calculation off. Are they stuck with that lot as a single lot with multiple units on it? Like that's the scenario that I'm looking at of like, well, it seems sticky.
Yeah, part of this, if we just pull back a little bit and take out the natural resource part of it, because part of it feels like there's an elemental question about like, so how does the middle housing land division thing work? Like, how committed are you to this? So I think forget creeks and streams. Let's just talk about a regular flat basic lot that you decide you want to put 4 detached units on. We're going to review that, make sure you're meeting the setbacks as a whole. You're not covering too much of the lot. You've got the right building separation, all the stuff that you need to do for that. And then you say, now I've got approval. Maybe I went ahead and built it. And then I finally decided after I got them built, yeah, I think I want to put these on my own lot so I can sell each of you one of them. That's pretty straightforward. You know, there's very little risk, I think. You know, you're just drawing the lines where it makes sense to draw the lines because all the units are there. Alternately, you could submit the building permits for those units. We review them, look at the lot as a whole, we approve them and issue the building permit. And you say, okay, I've got these in hand. I'm going to build these. I'd like to go ahead and plat them now so that I can start selling them to fund or finance the effort. Just because you get the building permit doesn't mean you have to build the thing, right? But with that building permit, you can go ahead and do the middle housing land division. So let's say you do that, and then I sell one to you, one to you, and one to you, and you decide like, well, I see that my lot came with this approved plan. I don't like this. I want a new plan. You are stuck for the moment with the size lot, and if you want to change your plan, you're going to have to make sure that you're not throwing the rest of the site somehow out of kilter with all the lot coverage, all those things. So when you throw the natural resource piece in it, I think where I was trying to go was, we're going to look at that initially and make sure that we don't get to make you put it in a tract because it's not a conventional land division, but we do get to apply, if you qualify for a clear and objective review for anything, this new water quality resource thing or the HCA thing, we'll do that way. You are going to get to disturb some stuff probably, or you want to go through a type 3 review and do heavy, I'm going to disturb a lot of it, and I'm going to make the case to the planning commission that I got my natural resource expert. So we'll have a crack at reviewing it. We just may be kind of limited in how much we can stop any disturbance from happening, which with a conventional land division, we can say, if you want to do this the easy way, get it all out of play. So does that help clarify a little bit what your concern was about, like the risk of, or a loop of, I plat middle housing lots and then somehow they come back into play for redevelopment, or I think I lost you.
Yeah, again, I was just imagining someone having multiple units on one parcel and then coming back and trying to replat it and not being able to because it throws off the development standards, including WQR. So that's all.
They would still be able to divide it. We would just have to be sure that the things that were already protected for that whole parent lot continued to be protected.
That makes sense. Okay. Thanks.
So I was super disappointed to see the cluster development section be on the chopping block, but what purpose is it serving? I think it's a really, for its time when it was introduced, I think it was particularly innovative, and it was always something I was really happy to see in our code. Always a little disappointed that we weren't seeing any activity there, but again, it calls for a type 3 review, and we're really better served by these type 1 permits that allow the by right development, as long as they can comply with our standards, as long as our clear and objective standards are good, and again pretty much represent what we understand to be the best practices with the current science. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. It's like I want a high bar to clear for these, but we are talking about really limited impact. It's just that when you nickel and dime things, particularly things you're not in, don't have a vast supply of to begin with, you know, it can be very impactful. And so, you know, I just want us to be cautious about that, you know, and obviously, you know, the residential cluster development code, you know, is not serving, you know, that purpose, you know, at this point. So we can say goodbye to that, but you know, just maybe as you're looking at how we're doing or how a cottage cluster, you know, or a detached plex, you know, should be thought of, I guess, as a cottage cluster with fewer than 5 dwellings. You know, I mean, if we think about how those, or think about what the residential cluster development code was bringing that we might be losing, you know, in particular in WQR and HCA, you know, natural resources scenarios. I don't have, I didn't do like a really thorough review of that section of the code again before this meeting. And so I don't have anything particular to point at, but, you know, I guess since we are already kind of, you know, committing to the idea of going through some exercises to think about how, you know, different scenarios about how, you know, middle housing would end up working, you know, on sites with WQR. You know, let's think about if there's anything that we can, you know, take from the residential cluster code and, you know, maybe bring that to, you know, the middle housing, you know, developments that do occur on sites with WQR where it's appropriate or where there's an opportunity to do so. And yeah, if you want me to review that more specifically and offer more specific suggestions in advance of the next work session, then I can do that. But I just hadn't done it before this meeting.
Yeah, that'd be great if you could do that. We'll take a look at it too, because I think that's a really good point, Chair Edge. I think that, yeah, we just want to be sure we're not losing anything, because sometimes that does happen when we do these overhauls. We miss some key component and then we have to go back and fix it. So if we could do that analysis ahead of time, we should.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we already, did you say this, Brett, that we already kind of talked about the mitigation requirements, or did you have more to go through?
I didn't have any more to go through.
So Brett, to be clear, you're finished going through all of the questions in the staff report?
To be clear, I have talked about the staff report as much as I
need to at the moment?
Feel like I need to at the moment, but.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I had some notes about the mitigation requirements, you know, the questions or recommendations, you know, that you'd put in there, but really, I think we kind of already addressed that by, you know, just kind of looking, obviously we want invasives out of the picture as much as possible. We should be looking for opportunities, you know, and I realize that, you know, we already touched on this, which is that we don't get to exact, or at this point in our code, we are not exacting any kind of improvements to WQR or anything, any kind of cleanup at all, unless you're impacting it and taking some of it away. Maybe we should look for opportunities to try, you know, when there is development on a site, you know, see if there is an opportunity there to get some cleanup of, you know, WQR areas. That's maybe proportional to, you know, the amount of, you know, the intensity of the development on the site. You know, I'm not sure what we want to do there, but it feels like there'd be, you know, there should be an opportunity to get some cleanup, you know, of natural resource areas on sites that people acquire and then are stewards of. You know, when they're doing development, even if they're not impacting the natural resource areas directly. So if we could explore that a little bit, I'd love to have some follow-up on that question if there is a legal mechanism for allowing that kind, as long as it is, I don't know if it's, you know, we have to be proportional to the square, you know, the surface area of the rooftop or impervious surfaces on the site, or, you know, since we're already doing stormwater, you know, I don't know if we can do that specifically, but, you know, something along those lines where we can see what those options are. I'd love to hear back about that.
I think it would be good to look into that and just confirm some thoughts about it. But I did think about this a little bit with the question of when you're disturbing any part of the water quality resource area, should it, part of the required mitigation be that you, for example, remove invasives from the entire WQR on your site? And I didn't consult yet with Justin on this, but my feeling on it was we probably can't do that because it does start to be not proportional to make someone do something in a portion of the site that is not directly impacted by it. I think a way that we have generally gotten some cleanup of water quality resource areas more broadly on a site is by how large the mitigation planting area is. So when you are having to put so many trees and shrubs in, you are often needing a lot of space. And so you may be disturbing, you know, a proportionally smaller area of WQR, but to fit those plantings in, you have to actually use quite a bit of your site. And then we are getting you to pull the invasives out of there. So yeah, that feels comfortable and defensible. But these are good questions, I think, for us to look into. I'm skeptical that we'll be able to get more than we are, but I think it's good to take a fresh look at it and see what the answer might be today.
And then just to repeat it, just to make sure that again, you know, in the theme of, you know, defensible regulations, legally defensible regulations, that we do kind of identify some nexus between the policy objective of clean water and the you know, the presence of invasive species or absence of invasive species.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. Yeah, I can see some discomfort without a little better rationale for that to, yeah, my initial setting of a platform was going to be to try to acknowledge what I said earlier, which is the truth is that, and we can confirm this with just a little analysis check, is that the habitat conservation areas are, you know, usually extend beyond. They're usually underlaying with the water quality resource areas, but extend beyond them. And so it feels like it's true that the water quality resource rules are supposed to be about water quality, but they are actually serving a habitat function and they're underlaid by a habitat conservation area. And since they're both in the same part of the code, yeah, I mean, my first, you know, shoot from the hip take on it would be like, yeah, can't we just make that connection because they are serving that function?
It feels so intuitive, you know what I mean? It's like, I'm right there with you. Yeah. You know, it feels like it's just the normal, you know, the natural course of, you know, of handling these overlapping regulatory areas. Yeah, I just want to be careful about making sure that our regulations are defensively achieving the goals that they're supposed to be, what their purpose is. So,
Roger that.
Okay, well, I guess the only other thing was, and you kind of said a little bit about this, about how, you know, when you have to do a mitigation planting, you end up needing to do maybe to mitigate more area than what has been disturbed in order to get, you know, all of those plantings in. And so just generally speaking, I think that's a good goal is to try to make sure that we're repairing more than, you know, we're seeing impacted. And, you know, and we should be trying to really, however we can do it in the code, and this is hard to do, you know, with what we were just talking about, but however we do it in the code, we want all WQR areas ultimately, eventually, one day to be high WQR areas, you know, high quality. So how does the code, how can the code support, you know, that long range goal, you know, and how is individual development of individual parcels, you know, over time contributing to us ending up with, you know, high quality WQR and HCA in the areas where those exist.
Point well taken. We're with you on that. So we're going to keep thinking about that and making sure that we're kind of bringing that lens to this analysis as we're working through it.
Perfect. Okay, I think I've said enough. Is there any other comments or questions from the commission? Okay, well, thank you, Brett. It was great to see you again, and we look forward to seeing you again on this topic next time.
Likewise, thank you. Thanks for your attention and the good questions and review of materials. Appreciate it.
Okay, so do any commissioners have any other items for discussion? Just regular planning commission, other business or updates? Anything from staff?
I do not have anything at this time.
Okay, then I guess we're on to the forecast for future meetings.
Yes, indeed. So we are not meeting on July 23rd. That's the next meeting. And then on August 13th, we've got the continuation of the food park application. And I would just say to the two commissioners that weren't here, if you want to participate in that meeting, you are more than welcome to. You just need to be sure that you go through and read all the materials, watch the planning commission meeting, come versed in it. If you are not comfortable doing that, you can also recuse yourself from the conversation. So you have options. And if you want to talk about that at all, you are welcome to reach out to me before the next meeting. And then in addition to that hearing item, we're going to have a work session item. We've got the annual joint meeting with the NDAs coming up. And so we were going to talk about the agenda for that at that meeting. And then you will see Brett again, probably in that next meeting in August, or potentially the first meeting in September. Yep, I'm seeing first meeting in September probably. So, okay, that's it.
Great. Thank you for that, and thank you for the reminder that we should, watch the video and review the materials before that next hearing if we were not there. So I will do so. Okay, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn. I do need a motion though.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion to adjourn and a second. Any further discussion before? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. All right, we are adjourned.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Have a great
Have a good night.
Thank you. Thanks.
You took a deep dive in the weeds, my friend.